Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and patch 905 brought a lot of changes. A lot of changes for a variety of classes, but rogues in particular. We have had fixes, and a lot of them in 905. Some of them are small, like, simple bug fixes, and others have been, like, straight-up Covenant ability redos. Not a complete rework starting from the bottom up from scratch, but rather a change-up that allows rogues to play more than just Kyrian and Night Fae, with Venti becoming more prominent and Necrolord also becoming more prominent, allowing all three specs to really highlight different aspects of themselves, particularly for Assassination and Outlaw. Speaking about Assassin, rogues have gotten a couple changes when it comes to classes, with Assassination getting some of the biggest ones, allowing itself to become one of the more played and more viable specs in this patch in particular. So Outlaw didn't really change much, it just basically got more stuff to play with, especially the Necrolord Covenant in AoE, making its AoE damage even more impressive. And then Assassination with some of the changes, it's looking really good for single target. But how is Subtlety Rogue doing? And is it able to compete against the other rogues? The reason I'm asking this question is because some of you guys have actually had legitimate concerns. Is Subtlety basically being BFA 2.0'd? As in, back in BFA, everybody played Outlaw, everybody played Assass, and then Subtlety just didn't really get the same treatment and changes as the other two, and then less and less people started playing the spec overall, and then it kind of became a bit of a meme, at least in PvE content. These are the questions that were actually asked on stream, so be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to catch some of the streams we stream regularly here on YouTube. But back to the main point, is Subtlety kind of getting shafted off to the side for Assassination and, I guess, Outlaw, since Assassination is the new single-target master? Taking a look at some of the sims, and these are just sims of like pure patchwork, as in no big mechanics, not a lot of movement, just single-target training the bosses down. Assassination is doing really well in pure single-target. Don't get me wrong, Outlaw and Subtlety are not super behind, but it looks like the Subtlety Rogue used to be the pure single-target champion, but as of recent, it looks like Assassination is kind of taken over, which is awesome that we're going to see more Assassination rogues playing. Hell, there are people that are playing the spec right now in pure single-target and are doing well in logs in certain fights. Some are cheesing with PI, getting multiple iterations of PI, or even the fairy buff from the priest in raids, but rogues that are not cheesing super hard are still able to put up good numbers and bring great numbers against the boss inside of a raid. To no surprise, Outlaw is really good in AoE sims. That's not really all that new. But Subtlety and Assassination are pretty close when it comes to AoE. But that's already two categories where you have the other two specs dominating. Full AoE, Outlaw, and full single target where Subtlety used to be the king. Now it's Assassination. But there's also another sim we could take a look at, and that's raid boss with adds, as in the boss is going to have adds around him. The boss damage is important here, as in like the funnel damage so the boss goes down, but it's also very important to do damage to enemies around you. Assassination has decent AoE damage and quite good boss funnel damage. Outlaw has great, exceptional AoE add damage and decent boss funnel damage, but again, mostly focused on adds. Subtlety, and that's where we kind of see a little bit of a fall off here, is kind of mediocre at AoE and kind of okay at hitting the boss, but in pure sims, again, not a lot of mechanics going on, pure just standing there DPSing things, it is falling a little bit behind. So I think that's where potentially we could have problems with Subtlety, is because it's just not really extremely good at this one thing. And with a class full of 3 DPS specs, I know mages, we have warlocks, and then even hunters. Trust me, if for hunters survival was the top DPS spec, we'd probably see a lot more of them, but it's marksman right now, and that's where we're seeing a lot of MM. And I think it's very, very similar with rogues. We're going to be seeing a lot of Outlaw because AoE damage, and it's really good at it. We're probably going to start seeing more Assassination because they're simming incredibly well. And then Subtlety, while not a bad spec, is just not really super dominant in any of the fields we see so far. But sims will take you only so far, so let's take a look at how the spec plays when it comes to dungeons as well as raids. And inside of Mythic Pluses, I feel like that's a great place to start at, because there's a variety of different situations: AoE, single target, 2 target, 3 target cleave, big 8+ target AoE, you name it. There's so many different opportunities for you to really test the specs and try things out. And it's been quite a bit since I played Subtlety, and it was a very enjoyable experience. This spec owns. It's actually super fun. Taking a look at some of the stuff that I noticed about the spec, the burst is incredible, and for Subtlety it's really easy to turn the damage from a 1 to an 11 in a heartbeat. And that's really, really nice. Where the other specs would need maybe a buff setup or a bit of a bleed setup with a Vendetta, Subtlety can just do it on a whim anytime it wants to. You can just turn up damage, and you have cooldowns that are so short, you always can have a phase where you do big damage to a boss or an add instead of a trash back very, very easily. Your AoE rotation is also really simple, and you're going to be facing a lot of enemies when it comes to AoE enemies and AoE adds, because you just press Shuriken Storm and Black Powder. Yeah, you need to maintain Slice and Dice. Yeah, you probably should be rupturing here and there. If you're running a Secret Technique, you should press that too from your talents, but if for the most part you're just pressing Shuriken Storm into Black Powder, that feels good, and that's really simple to do, and I feel like a lot of rogues could get behind that. But we can't just compliment Subtlety, we do have to take a look at some of the things that I didn't like about it. I think it has a bit of a dead spot for like 2-target, 3-target cleave. The single target feels great and feels smooth. The AoE feels super easy to execute, and between Manage and Slice and Dice and a couple of ruptures, that all feels fine. Where it doesn't feel as satisfying is the 2-target, 3-target combo. For Outlaw, as long as you're attacking more than one target, you get big AoE damage, and you're basically performing single target playstyle the whole time. With Assassination, you put up bleeds, which do damage because of mastery, but they also give you back energy, so there's like interactiveness between that playstyle of donning multiple enemies. And those bleeds will give you a bunch of energy, so you can spin Phantom Knives over and over, and then it's easier for you to manage those dots. Subtlety on 2-target, 3-target puts up Rupture on 2 enemies, and you don't have that same cool interaction as Assassination with the energy regen. And on 3 targets, you will start using Black Powder, but that ability can do so much more damage on 4 and higher targets, so to me it just didn't feel nearly as satisfying. It's serviceable damage, but on 2-target, 3 targets, I think that's kind of where the gap is for the spec, where the other two can do really, really well at it. Another cool thing about Subtlety is the specific playstyle of funneling. Every time you press Shuriken Storm, you generate a bunch of common points, and you can choose to spend them on whatever you want to. Normally in AoE trash packs, you'll use it on Black Powder, but technically Subtlety has a playstyle where you could use it in order to funnel common points and single target damage into a singular enemy. Imagine yourself in a Mythic Plus, you pull, let's say, really bad pull, and you spawn a prideful ad that's surrounded by a bunch of mobs in a dungeon. You kind of want to help out your team and do that single target nuking damage to the prideful. And that was one of those things that Subtlety could uniquely do above all the other specs. But ever since in Battle for Azeroth, Blizzard took away the ability for your Shuriken Storm, or Shuriken Storm, whenever he generates common points from nearby enemies, to buff the damage of Eviscerate, where Blizzard supported that funneling playstyle. With Shadowlands, they gave you an AoE finisher, which means you have a lot more spread damage, but you still have the unique mechanic of funneling. I just feel like that mechanic, while it is an aspect, it falls a little bit behind, because there's other classes that can do this funneling better, like Unholy Death Knights and Wandwalker Monks, for example. Those classes simply do more damage the more enemies are around, whether they debuff them like a monk with punches and kicks, or Unholy Death Knights where they make all their dots explode at the same time. So you have classes that are able to do high single target boss damage while also not having to sacrifice AoE damage. Subtlety will have to sacrifice either AoE or single target, which again does give you this playstyle, but there's other classes that can do that better. So in a sense, Subtlety in The Sims, it's kind of behind the other specs slightly, not super far, but very slightly. And then there's a unique aspect that Subtlety can do, but there's whole other classes that can do that just a little bit better. So I feel like those two things are going to kind of put Subtlety in a weird spot when it comes to trying to maximize the value of how much damage you can do for a group, whether it's inside of a raid, whether inside of a dungeon. Like, the spec is not bad, it's far from it. The damage is still very serviceable. We are not at the bottom when it comes to Subtlety, at the bottom of the charts in terms of damage. The damage is there. It's pretty competitive. I mean, you see everybody in the mother playing Subtlety in PvP, but it just doesn't really translate nearly as well into PvE now that Assassination got a hefty buff. Prior to this, Outlaw and Subtlety were the only two specs that were viable, but now that Assassination is in play, it feels like Subtlety, that had the advantage of pure single target, just kind of lost it a little. And there's definitely a potential for Subtlety in the future, where I think the spec is simply going to scale out of control, whereas we get better secondary stats, crit, haste, mastery, versatility. Once you hit certain breakpoints, that's when you'll really start to shine. But the way Subtlety is at right now in 905, it is true that this spec didn't really get too many updates with this patch. Certain covenants are a lot stronger, so there's cool choices, but some of the rogues are switching from Subtlety to Assassination if you are trying to maximize that single target. as it does look like the the balance of things have swung. I totally could see people sticking to sub, and you guys let me know if you are going to still playing sub, or are you playing the other spec Assassination and Outlaw for most of your PvE content, and you feel like sub is kind of being left behind. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I'll see all of you in another video.